So there is a lot that is going on in this trailer. It is completely jam-packed with a ton of different things, A, that we can speculate on, but B, that we can get very, very excited for. However, we do have some confirmations of things that are going to be in Shadow of the Erdtree, which we will go over at the end of the video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let the trailer play in case you guys have not seen it. After that, we will do a trailer breakdown. I'll go over frame by frame what we're seeing, what we think is going to go on in the Shadow of the Erdtree, and if you have any speculations or things that you noticed in the trailer that I didn't pick up, leave them down in the comments below. So let's get right into it.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
In that forsaken place, blood must spill. Blood of your fellows. The Erdtree faithful.
They were never saints. They just happened to be on the losing side of a war.
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?
I presume you, too, are keen to know just what kind Miquella is doing here.
Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death in the embrace of Vesper's flame.
Come now, touch the withered arm, and travel to the realm of shadow. I will not be far behind. May we meet again.
So the trailer opens up with an unknown NPC standing right where we fought Mohg, Lord of Blood. This only makes sense considering it was very heavily speculated that Shadow of the Erdtree would be accessible through touching Miquella's hand right there on the altar. It seems to be all but confirmed that that's exactly what we're going to need to do, so if you haven't cleared out that area yet, you might want to go fight Mohg in order to get access to this DLC when it drops. We then get this absolutely gorgeous shot of us riding on the back of Torrent towards these shadow lands. It looks absolutely phenomenal. It almost looks like some form of Limgrave. Obviously, this is the Shadow of the Erdtree, so everything could be inverse, or it could be a separate version of stuff we've already seen, but the architecture looks very similar, as well as some of the area. We then get a shot of us riding through those ghostly graves that we saw in the very first image that teased Shadow of the Erdtree in the first place. As we come away from those graves, we end up going to this cliffside where it opens up and we can see all of the area that we are going to be exploring in Shadow of the Erdtree, and it looks absolutely massive and gorgeous. I do think it's also very interesting too that it looks like there's drapes up above the Erdtree. It just looks very reminiscent of other things that we've seen in the game, especially within the capital. The trailer then goes back to what looks like those ghostly graves in this shot, and it looks like we are looking at some kind of rune or a sigil, but I do want to speculate here for just a second and say that what if this is the type of grace site that we stop at in this area? It looks looks completely different, but I didn't see any other sites of grace within the trailer, so I am curious if that's what it could be. We then get a few separate shots of different NPCs within the Shadow of the Erdtree, the first of which has this really dope looking sword, and also some very interesting looking armor. You should take note of something here though as well, because all throughout this trailer you're going to see many different types of Crucible imagery, as well as Saint Trina imagery, because that's the alternate version or alternate personality or whatever you want to call it of Miquella. And on this very first NPC, you can see that on the hilt of his sword. The swirls are very reminiscent of what we see from Saint Trina in Elden Ring, and I think it's good to point that out, even if it's just speculation. We then see a guy who looks very much like Havel from Dark Souls 1, and it moves into another area where there's going to be someone laying on the ground, but in that area is going to be purple, and purple is also representative of Saint Trina in Elden Ring, and you can see some Trina's lilies here in the back. This next scene reminds me very much of Volcano Manor in terms of going and talking to an NPC who seems to sit on a throne, and it's also interesting to me that the architecture here is very similar to the opening sequence in Raya Lucaria. We then get everyone's favorite Souls-like trope, and that is a poison swamp, which is 100% confirmed for this DLC. We then see a painting of what looks to be a royal family. The woman looks to be pregnant by the way she's holding her hands, and the brooch around the gentleman's neck is very reminiscent of what we saw earlier on that knight's sword handle. The trailer then shows a few different areas that we're going to be traversing through. Obviously you see a bunch of jars hanging there, which very much look to be like the same jar type that Alexander is, and then we also see what could potentially be our first hero's grave with all that lava, or some form of dungeon within Shadow of the Erdtree. The next shot is one of my absolute favorites from the entire trailer, and it looks to be the capital of the Erdtree, or a giant city that resembles the capital that we see in regular Elden Ring. And if you zoom in close to this image, you can see a bunch of floating rocks, much like we see in Fair Missoula, so I'm wondering if there's not going to be some form of time aspect to the city as well. We're then going to get a few different shots of different enemies that you're going to be fighting within Shadow of the Erdtree, and then finally we get our look at our very first boss fight within Shadow of the Erdtree. He looks to be some form of elemental boss, considering we see him use what looks to be death blight or some kind of smoke, as well as lightning when he's fighting in his giant arena. I gotta say, this boss definitely screams Sekiro vibes to me, so let me know down in the comments if you agree or not. Now, it's at this point that we finally see the big bad of the trailer, Mesmer the Impaler. This guy looks absolutely incredible. Aesthetically, he looks absolutely phenomenal as a boss. You can see all of his armor and his snakes. Everything is screaming anti-Erdtree. We've seen a lot of imagery of snakes being against the Erdtree in Elden Ring, so this definitely goes with this theme, and I am curious. He does mention his mother right here in the scene, and I'm wondering if he's talking about the lady we saw earlier in the painting. We then get a showcase of a bunch of new abilities and gameplay from Shadow of the Erdtree, with new Ashes of War shown off, as well as some sorceries and awesome incantations that we will have access to. I do want to take a second and highlight this triple kick that we see. If we get incantations that allow us to use Kung Fu in Elden Ring, I'm gonna lose my mind. We then see a few different weapons, a giant jar that can be thrown like a bomb, as well as a bolted crossbow that looks like a machine gun. And this tracks because we're supposed to be getting 8 new weapon types here in Shadow of the Erdtree. We're also gonna be looking at a new incantation here. It looks like an orange bear, but it reminds me a lot of Grail's Roar, so I'm very curious as to what this is. We then get a shot of an absolutely breathtaking area where you're fighting what appears to be a red dancer. We also get a reskin of the Draconic Tree Sentinel looking like a giant knight using gravity sorcery on top of a boar. And then we get a bunch of different shots of different animals around the Shadow of the Erdtree using Crucible incantations, which is kind of crazy. And side note, we know this is an ability we'll be able to use because if you look at the Steam storefront right now, you're going to see this picture that I'm showing you right here on the screen, looking like our character is allowed to shoot these spikes out of his back. We're then going to get a few shots of different bosses within the Shadow of the Erdtree, and we finally get a look at the big boss fight with Mesmer the Impaler, and it looks absolutely brutal. We also see that our character in this boss fight is going to be using some form of twin blade shield, and it looks like he's dual wielding them, so this is going to be very interesting and make for some very neat builds. And the last thing that we're getting in this trailer looks to be like the Crucible Knight incantation, where they raise up on wings and then charge at us, as we've seen so many times in Elden Ring. If we finally get an incantation that lifts us off the ground like this, it's going to be very cool. And lastly, we get the Shadow of the Erdtree title on the screen, and the next phase is our first and probably only snippet that we are going to get of Miquella, and then we get an up close and personal view of Miquella's Halig Tree, or the Shadow of the Erdtree, whatever that might be, And that is the trailer. Now, I did tell you guys we're going to go over some for sure confirmations that came out of an interview with Miyazaki for Shadow of the Erdtree, and they are as follows. First and foremost, George R.R. Martin did not write new material for Shadow of the Erdtree. This is coming from everything he originally gave them when he gave them Elden Ring, so they are just going down a different route to go through this different storyline. Now, in terms of how large the actual expansion is going to be, it is said that it's going to be a little bit larger than Limgrave, but it is going to have a ton of new dungeons and different areas for us to explore, so it's going to feel very large. As of right now, it's been confirmed that there's 10 new bosses, and I don't know if those include mini bosses or not. I would love for them to be 10 big bosses, but we will have to wait and see. There's also going to be 8 new weapon categories, a few of which we saw in the trailer, so I'm very curious to see what those are, and I'm definitely excited to start making some new builds with them. Obviously, we're going to have new armor as well, which has also been confirmed, and as far as the difficulty of this expansion, it's going to rival the end game of Elden Ring. Pretty much after the capital onward is probably going to be how hard the difficulty is for this DLC. And lastly, I know everybody loves it, but it has been confirmed there will be one massive poison swamp, as is Miyazaki's style for this expansion. So guys, that is going to be it for our full Shadow of the Erdtree trailer breakdown. We do have a release date of June 21st, 2024, so only a few months away. Definitely excited about that one. Let me know down in the comments anything that I may have missed. I love talking lore with Elden Ring, so if there's anything lore-wise in this trailer that you took note of and that I didn't find, let me know down in the comments and we will talk all about it. But I appreciate you guys watching the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe on your way out, hit that bell notification, and until next time, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.